I have been playing the ever-living daylights out of this game, Deep Rock Galactic Survivor. It is a really, really great entry into the Deep Rock Galactic series. Of course, Deep Rock Galactic being the cult co-op game where you dive as dwarves, you take out bugs, you mine a load of stuff, and you come back and have a beer. Deep Rock Galactic Survivor is a single-player, auto-shooter roguelike. Now, if you've ever played Vampire Survivors, it's the same thing. This is heavily modeled off those types of games, and it is Deep Rock Galactic's entry into this particular genre. And what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to review it for you. Admittedly, you can probably tell that I like it from the intro, but I am going to be fair, and I'm going to have some balanced criticism later on. But before we get into that, I like to start my review videos by having a very strong opening 30 seconds review that you guys can listen to, and you can hopefully make a purchase decision based on that 30 seconds or so. I'm not promising that it's going to be 30 seconds. It's going to be short. I do it at the start of the video so you don't have to watch all the way through. Deep Rock Galactic Survivor is $8.99 GBP, around the $10 mark. It is an incredibly good value for money game. You will get lots of hours of enjoyment out of this game for a very, very small price point. It is admittedly extremely similar to most other auto shooters that you will have played in the past. If you have played things like Brotato, Vampire Survivors, and actually more poignantly Soulstone Survivors, which is a game that this game feels most closely related to, you're not going to get anything extremely new from Deep Rock Galactic. You are going to have the same kind of targeting system from your weapons. The level up system is very similar to Soulstone Survivors. There's nothing like Brotato where certain upgrades or certain items can basically completely change the way that you play your build. You'll often find that the most of your customization comes from the weapons that you purchase or the weapons that you choose to use, and then their particular overdrives that you can use later on. An overdrive is essentially a special upgrade for a weapon once you've invested enough resource into it. The one new addition that Deep Rock Galactic brings to the table is the mining feature, where you're able to mine through the terrain and kind of create your own paths. This actually adds a lot of subtle depth to the game, where you can kind of box enemies in. You can sort of like build giant death pods where you sort of pull them into a small choke point and act like you're a 300 member and just fight off hordes and hordes and hordes of bugs. It's really good fun. So my genuine baseline takeaway is this is 100% worth the money. It is so damn cheap for so many hours of entertainment. And if you're a fan of the Deep Rock Galactic franchise, you're absolutely going to love this. Now, let's actually dive into this game in a bit more detail and talk about the individual areas, because there are some criticisms. It's not all sunshines and rainbows. This game does have some things that it could do better. Let's start off with basic gameplay. If you have played a roguelite auto shooter before, you will find that there is absolutely nothing new apart from the mining when it comes to Deep Rock Galactic. It is familiar territory for those of you that are very used to these types of games. So if you've played Vampire Survivors, you've played Brotato, you've played Soulstone Survivors, you will get a very similar kind of feeling from Deep Rock Galactic Survivors. You jump in, you have a limited arsenal to begin with, you level up, you get access to more arsenals, bigger upgrades, and eventually you are taking on hordes and hordes and hordes of bugs. The unique element to Deep Rock Galactic Survivor is that you can mine, which allows you to manipulate the terrain, which on the front of it, on sort of the top of it, it doesn't sound like it's incredibly deep. It does allow you to kind of set up really cool choke point scenarios. You can kind of manipulate the bugs into an area that you want them to be in, and it just has like a nice feel to it. I can't describe it. Just being able to kind of walk across the terrain, get yourself out of a tricky situation by mining your way through a rock, is just fun. As you level up, you will overclock your weapons, you will reach very powerful heights, and that eventually allows you to become as powerful to complete the dives. These are not endless, at least the first few levels are not endless. You have a set objective for a mission. When you dive in, there is a timer bar at the top, and there is certain sort of waypoints on that timer bar which represents certain events that are going to take place whilst you're in a particular level. Most of these are going to be things like a horde or a swarm has appeared, and that's essentially just a large group of enemies that's going to chase you down. You may have a drop pod that you need to clear an area for, or it may be something like dreadnought eggs are going to hatch. What I will say is that the levels are quite repetitive. Every level is the same. There is a side objective in each level, but these are generally not particularly game impactful. These are things like mine a certain mineral or pick up some certain things on the floor, and they don't change massively. There's 3 that I've seen as a primary. There is mine Morkite, which is like a blue mineral. There is collect alpaca blooms, which are like these little flowers, and there's collect these mushroom things, which are like sort of, again, similar to collecting the alpaca blooms. And now these are side objectives from Deep Rock Galactic, so if you've played Deep Rock Galactic, you'll know them. But ultimately, they are quite repetitive across the levels. And I have played, let's say, 8 scenarios, and every single scenario has been identical. The scenarios, apart from the environment, have not changed a massive amount. And at the moment, there are 3 types of environment. There is like a crystalline area, there is a lava area, and there's kind of like a vine area. And apart from some small changes, like some inaccessible and non-mineable areas in the vine area and the magma area having some hazardous floor, it's not much is like really changing between the biomes, apart from the kind of the way they look and some very minor things that affect the way that you play. And every level is pretty much identical. You jump in, you fight off hordes, eventually until an elite spawns. You then have to kill that elite within a certain time before the enemies become too strong, and then you have to extract through the pod that you dropped in on. It is the same thing on every level. Now, that might sound to you that it's going to get boring quickly, but as with all of these games, they are all quite repetitive in some way, shape, or form. But it's not really about what you're doing in the level that counts. It's just the way it feels to play as the primary way of kind of judging the quality of the game. And frankly, despite there not being a huge amount to write home about in terms of level variety, it still has felt fun every single time that I've played. And I think that's the most important part, right? Now, character choice. When you look at some of the competitors on the market, like, let's say, Soulstone Survivors, Vampire Survivors, and even Brotato, there is a mass amount of characters, and I think Brotato is one of the best in the markets for making characters feel different and unique. Now, for Deep Rock Galactic Survivor, you have 4 main classes: the Scout, the Gunner, the Engineer, and the Driller. And they all have kind of different playstyles and feels, and each class has subclasses, which changes the way that you approach and play the game a little bit. One of the things that I would say is a fair criticism of this game is that I don't think, apart from the main classes, you get a massive difference in playstyle between each of them. For instance, the Scout and the Gunner felt quite similar to play because they were very much about ranged kinetic weapons. The Engineer definitely felt a little different because you were using turrets and you're playing around turrets, and obviously the Driller is a lot more melee focused. But frankly, like, the classes don't feel so wildly different. Like you don't have a completely different game plan for each class. And I think that might be in part due to the way that the levels are designed, but ultimately I still found myself doing the same thing. Like, you still run at things, you run away from the hordes, you generally use the exploding aliens to try and blow up the main packs, and then you're mining stuff for the most part. So it is just worth noting that even though there are these subclasses and these different classes, I don't feel that they massively change the way that I approach the game. Albeit, you know, it might be as we get further in and we unlock more weapons, things do change massively, but especially for the early doors, each of the classes felt quite similar. And that's okay. It still feels extremely satisfying to play, but a criticism would be that there was something to learn from things like Brotato, where each of the classes and subclasses managed to make you feel like you were playing a different game every time, and there were different focuses and different ways to play. And every time I play a Brotato run with a new character, I'm approaching it in a completely different way than I was before. And with the Deep Rock Galactic Survivors, I didn't quite get that feeling, at least not yet. And that's okay. Like I said, it's perfectly fine. But you will find that, you know, there is definitely a distinct difference in playstyle between the main classes. You know, you will find that with Engineer, it's a lot better to have some movement speed and mining speed because you're really just playing around your turrets. So you really want to sort of make sure you have the maneuverability to escape while your turrets do the work. With Gunner, it's all about armor. You don't really care too much about movement speed because you're there to take a bit of a beating whilst you fend them off. With the Scout, it's a little bit about being a bit more slippery, and that movement speed does help again. So again, you're going to find that there are some differences in playstyles to an extent, but realistically, a lot of the characters feel relatively similar. And the subclasses don't do a huge amount to shake things up. They do a little bit, but not a huge amount to shake things up. The upgrade system is something that I actually did take issue with at the start, and the more that I've played the game, the more that I do like it, but it still doesn't feel like it has the depth of some of the other upgrade systems out there. If you have played Soulstone Survivors, you'll find this very familiar. All of the upgrades are primarily based around the weapons, and then also based around stat increases on specific subtypes. So let's say like kinetic damage increase, or reload speed, or turret deployment time. So you'll find that you're not getting things like upgrades in Vampire Survivors, which are then going to suddenly completely shift the way that you're playing, and this big upgrade has suddenly completely changed the game for you. Everything is about incremental increases. That is the basic leveling up upgrade system, and obviously when you're out of the levels, you also use your golden nitra to buy further upgrades. You have upgrades to specific weapons, but you also have general upgrades. You have then specific subclass upgrades as well. So just to list them out, you get general upgrades towards your actual character, so things like movement speed, armor, mining speed, etc. And little tip, mining speed is great. It makes the game feel that much smoother. You then have specific kind of like general weapon upgrades, so general reload speed, general damage, general elemental damage, general kinetic damage. And then you have weapon specific upgrades. Now these weapon specific upgrades, they are much like your generic weapon upgrades, so it'll be like reload speed or damage or whatever, but they then also increase the level of your weapon. And once you hit a certain level on your weapon, you can then overclock that weapon. And that overclock does bring new abilities to the forefront, so the turrets can follow you and move, for instance, or you might change the damage to elemental if it was kinetic, or you'll have a massively increased fire rate, but maybe have a slightly longer reload speed, etc. These sort of overclocked abilities are designed to make the weapons feel different afterwards. Some of that is achieved and some of it isn't, frankly. Like some of the overclocks are just like good stat increases, right? And it doesn't really feel that much different to actually play the weapon than it did before. I would have liked overclocks to be a bit more game changing in terms of what they brought to the table, but I think otherwise they serve a fine job and they give you something to aim for when it comes to upgrading weapon paths, which is perfectly okay. Outside of that, you have upgrades outside the game as well. So there are minerals that you can collect inside the game. These are usually very standout ones. You can see one on the screen right now, this orange kind of pillar. That is a mineral that you can collect that will then impact your upgrade system outside the game. And if you've played things like Vampire Survivors and Soulstone Survivors, you have kind of like a mini skill tree that you can upgrade outside the game. And this is just basic stat increases. It's extremely similar to Vampire Survivors, so it'll be things like movement speed and luck and etc, etc. And those things will then give you a slightly better start than you would have had previously. But otherwise, the upgrade system is relatively safe. I think safe is the best way to play this. It is tried and tested, and it does what it says on the tin. Not much more to say about the upgrade system than that. Level design. Now look, I'm going to caveat this section with the fact that I haven't completed the game in its entirety yet, but I've played a good 10 hours of the game and I've done at least 6 missions, which I think is a good indicator of whether the missions are going to change or not. If you've gone 6 missions into the game and they're all the same, it's very likely that they're all going to stay the same. Now, I'm also going to caveat this that I haven't read any developer comms about this being an early access and whether they plan to change things up, which I assume they do. So if anyone in the comments knows whether they plan to change things up and have read developer comms on this, then please feel free to let me know. But this is the one area of the game that I think is lacking. And look, this game, as I've said before, is fantastic, and for the price point, it's worth every single penny. But every level is identical. No matter the biome, no matter the danger level that you're on, everything seems to be go into a level, play through the timeline at the top, which usually includes beating off a horde, and then... why did I say beating off a horde? Oh my god. Killing or destroying a horde. Oh my god. And then also dealing with like a drop pod. Right? And it takes you through 4 levels of this until you reach the final level, which is then kill 3 elites in eggs and kill this giant beast that you can see on your screen here called the Dreadnought. That is every level. Over and over again. And given that Deep Rock Galactic had a very large variance in types of missions that you could do, it feels a little rubbish that Deep Rock Galactic Survivor is basically just kill Dreadnought over and over again. And I do feel like there could be some room for extra types of missions. I assume it would be coming. We are in early access, of course, but just worth it to note that the level design feels a little lackluster at times. And that's nothing major, but just a little lackluster at times. Okay, so replay value is also what I want to talk about. I mean, one of the things that you may ask is, well, if all the level designs are the same and actually the character depth isn't that huge, how replayable is the game? You know, what is the replayability of Deep Rock Galactic Survivors? Well, actually, I'll be honest with you, it's quite high. I mean, one of the things that you'll find about these types of games, it's not really, as I said, it's not really about the substance of what's in the levels. It's about how satisfying it is to blow huge amounts of stuff up on your screen in one go, and then collect all those little shiny orbs. It's those little endorphins that you get when all those little shiny XP orbs absorb into your character and you level up. That is what makes these auto battler games, or these auto shooter games, that endearing. It's that very core, sort of almost innate need to collect shiny things and level up, like, and the sort of the associated gameplay around it is about how best you can facilitate that and make it challenging at the same time. And I think Deep Rock Galactic does a really good job of that. The replayability of this is very high. I have played, what, nearly 20 hours of the game, with every level being relatively similar, each character feeling quite similar, but, you know, at least there's some different sort of ways that you're going to progress through with it. But I've found myself hopelessly addicted to it, and that should really tell you everything that you need to know about replayability. It's extremely replayable, and with more content, it's only going to become more replayable. And I think, like, for the price point, again, still a very, very, very good amount of content to cover, and you can play it huge amounts of times over if you're into this type of game, and you won't feel disappointed with the amount of money that you spend. And that's one of the things that I've often found with games recently. It's like, how disappointed do I feel coming out of that game, having spent the money on it? Well, I don't feel disappointed about the money that I spent on Deep Rock Galactic Survivor whatsoever. Absolutely fantastic. So the overall takeaway for the game, well, if you've watched through this far, you'll have noticed that I've covered the majority of what we would usually look at when it comes to an auto shooting survivor type game. And frankly, I think the overall takeaway is that it's worth the money. It's a fantastic addition to this genre. It has a lot of fan service towards Deep Rock Galactic players, so you'll find that you'll enjoy a lot of the content that's there just for the pure Deep Rock Galactic value. And as in a standalone addition to the genre, it is very serviceable. It doesn't push the boat out too far. The mining is about the most different that you're going to feel from some of the other additions in this category, but the graphics are a little bit above what you've probably played previously, and there's nothing much more satisfying than sort of literally destroying hordes of bugs. I mean, that is the very core kind of ethos for space-based combat. You know, since the dawn of time, it's been humans versus hordes of essentially like tyrannid-like creatures. Just very satisfying to do that. So yeah, I mean, the overall takeaway is it's a great game, and really it could have been significantly worse and still have been great value for money in terms of the price point that it's put at. And with the Deep Rock Galactic devs, you can expect frequent updates and some more additions. They have been very good at supporting their previous title, Deep Rock Galactic, so I have no qualms that we're going to see a similar amount of support for this particular addition into the genre too. So just a fantastic game. Really, really great value for money at the price point. You'll get lots of hours of gameplay out of it, and there is plenty of fun to be had. Hope you guys have a lovely day. I hope you enjoyed this review, and I'm going to be posting some gameplay guides of Deep Rock Galactic Survivors on the channel soon, so I hope you enjoy them.